Hello, good morning, good evening, wherever you are joining us from. Welcome to the Undivide Project podcast, the Changemakers Edition. And this season, we are focusing on women who are doing the work, whether it's in climate action, environmental justice, social justice, or facing another critical crisis that we have to deal with on this planet. We are highlighting the ones who are at the forefront of solutions. My name is Monica Sanders, and I'm your host, and I'm so excited to be here with Olivia Nielsen. Thank you so much for joining us, Olivia.
Thank you for having me.
So, I start every podcast off with asking for the person's origin story. And you can choose whatever origin appeals to you in this moment, but I would love to hear a story from your beginnings.
Well, my origin story, I think, confuses people. I am originally from Paris, France. And yes, I was raised by American parents, bohemian artists in Paris. And now I live in the US, but I've lived in quite a few countries in between the two, including in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake. And it was really in Haiti where I grounded myself in my passion to make cities and housing in particular stronger, greener, safer, and just more accessible to everyone, and women in particular. Since Haiti, I've worked in about, I don't know, 50 countries around the world. And I really specialize in countries that, how to put it, have gone through some difficult times and have very, very nascent housing markets, where the issues are very broad, and there's a lot to be addressed. And so, recently I've been working in countries like Timor-Leste, Djibouti, Papua New Guinea, so countries around the planet from the South Pacific to Haiti, but you see the same issues come up over and over and over again. So I look forward to discussing it more with you.
That is interesting work, and thank you for sharing that story because I was going to ask you about your passion for making housing affordable and resilient and green, but also the particular positionality of women, both in being part of the solution, but often being the bearers of the burden of existing housing issues. And then when we're talking about many of these places, every country that you named are among some of the most climate and disaster vulnerable places on the planet, and also
Mhm.
have a variety of other kinds of cascading challenges, is the word I'm going to use. Um, but whether we're talking about environment or politics or economics or justice, women tend to bear both the burden of the impacts and the solutions.
That's right, and there's an irony here, which is hard to escape. Women all over the world really are considered homemakers. Women disproportionately work from home. They stay at home longer than men. They live out of they stay at the house longer than men who go work outside of the house, right? And so whether we like it or not, women are still considered homemakers today. And yet, women are very rarely involved in planning housing projects, in developing housing plan projects. They have absolutely no say often in how these projects are built, how the houses are
Right.
built, how the communities are built. It's all designed by men. And it goes one step further, too. In countries around the world, even though women compose about half of the population, they only own a fraction of land titles. And so access to home ownership is very, very low in certain communities where I work. And even though, again, they're the homemakers, they are the ones who spend a disproportionate time at home, they do not own their home. They do not have a say over how their home is designed or how their community is designed. And this has huge impacts on their lives. And this is something that we're really trying to change. Um, and this also has an impact on climate change because women do want better homes. They do want safer homes. They want homes that are safe for their children to live in that will withstand the impact of disasters. And I'll give you one example, maybe to start us off. The world is going, and it is already starting, but is going to increasingly experience heat waves.
Yeah.
Really, really terrifying heat waves. And women who are at home will have to endure those heat waves, whereas men might be in offices or factories or different places that have the equipment to endure them. So women are they want to ensure that their homes are cool and have a nice airflow inside, right? And so we're seeing some nascent kind of burgeoning projects around the world to, for example, make slums a bit cooler by just some simple things, planting a few trees or painting the roofs white can make a big difference and can decrease the indoor air temperature by a few degrees. And this needs to take place on a much broader scale to make our homes, well, a place where we can actually be safe.
Right. And so I'm interested in how you implement the work because what you're saying is, women are not landowners or homeowners in many places, and in lots of places, access to ownership also means access to political and policy infrastructures where some of these changes need to take place. But yet, a lot of these projects require women involvement. And so I'm wondering how you navigate these spaces where women are disempowered, but you're actually implementing work with women.
Right. Well, there's many examples, and just as a detail, I work at a much broad scale. I don't often work at the project level or work at the policy level. Um, and then things are implemented. But for example, at the policy level, you can make sure that a certain amount of new houses built go to female headed households. And
Okay.
so I was looking at the Her Home report by the IFC this morning, and 25% of households in Colombia, for example, are female headed. That's a quarter of households are led by a woman. In India, it's about 10%. But that number fluctuates from country to country, but it's always a pretty big number. And you can make sure that if there is a government housing project, that you reserve a certain amount of housing units for female headed households. Another thing that you can do is you can incorporate within banking guidelines preferential guidelines for female headed households. You can ensure that they get preferential guidelines so they don't get discriminated credit wise. You can also say if there is a married couple applying for a loan, and this happens very often. Often the married couple applies for the loan, but only the man is on the title of the home, even though they both owe the debt.
They both owe the debt,
Yeah.
or she might have contributed to the financing or the collateral for the loan.
So you can ensure that they are both, if you are both responsible for the loan, then you both must be on the title, ensuring equal access for women. So at a policy level, there's a lot you can do to involve women. And then when you design the projects themselves, I think it's so important to listen to women more often. And even in I live in Boston, and I have two small toddlers, and it's a very dangerous environment to have two small toddlers. And Boston is considered one of the most walkable cities in the US. And yet I am in a constant fear of cars hitting my children. And this is a
Yeah.
worldwide fear, right? Because cities were designed around cars. They were not designed around women and their needs and children. So even in my city in Boston, I try to advocate for longer cross times for the sidewalks, right? For the
Right.
crosswalks, right? Because they tried bringing two small toddlers in
Across the street
5 seconds
in
across a busy
25
street.
seconds.
Yes,
Right.
they give you no time, and then the cars get a whole minute, but you get 5 seconds. Even in the US, there's a lot more we can do plowing the sidewalks in my city. They don't plow the sidewalks, they plow the roads professionally. And so the cars get access to the roads. But if you are pushing a stroller in your community and it has just snowed, it is very, very difficult. Um, so
Yes.
that's just some of the things that I'm doing for myself. But when you think about women in other countries, all their needs from, if they are the homemaker, let's help them make this process easier and better, giving access to community gardens, implementing daycares within the communities, having safe roads with no cars, having play spaces, green spaces, places where people can cook communally, all types of different options. And again, it's not for me to pick them. It's to give a voice to the community for them to say what they need themselves.
I think all of those are wonderful examples. And I'm glad that you brought up Boston because I was going to say any or all of these could also be transferable to the United States or other G8 countries. Um, but I think the difference is that we have the capacity in terms of financial and technical resources. It's about being willing to make the mental shift, if that's a fair way of saying it.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And empowering people to speak their mind and to show that their voice is just as important. Yeah.
You are now, you've worked in a number of different countries, but a number of different kinds of institutions. And sometimes when you're within an institution or a large organization, being able to filter the agency and the desires of people and communities on the ground up to the policy level can be difficult. So I'm interested in how you are designing or co-designing the solutions, the concepts, the feedback that would eventually become policy for your organization to make sure that those voices are surfaced.
Yeah. I think it's about working both ways. So I love what I do, and I really focus on a unique niche, and not many people do what I do. And so I've been really focusing on housing development. And so I've seen a lot of what can work and what can't work. And so, for example, right now, I'm working in Mongolia.
Okay.
And Mongolia is a very interesting, like the capital of Mongolia, Ulaanbaatar, is actually the most polluted city in the world in the winter. And children suffer considerably. They have a lot of respiratory diseases because of it. And one of the reasons is because they heat their homes with coal. It's
Oh,
very, very cold, and they heat their homes with coal, and the homes are poorly insulated, and the children are just living amongst coal burning, all winter long. So, we're trying to figure out how, and the government has done a lot of great work on housing, but it's only accessible to the top 10% of the population. They've built these really energy efficient green homes, but it's really not working for 90% of the population. So, what we're trying to do, and we're inspired by what has worked in other countries. And what we see in Mongolia is that it's one of the least dense places in the world as well, because of land allocation that was done over the last few decades. You see, it kind of almost looks like Texas in terms of density.
and how people are spread out. Yeah.
Right. And exactly. And so now, being inspired by the ADU movement in the US, or what's being called backyarding in South Africa, this idea of applying a gentle density from our countries to this country, so another context. But so building additional units in people's backyards, but making them green, making them earthquake resistant because they have very strong earthquakes in Mongolia too, making them resistant to the cold and everything. So we go in, we come in with an idea that was inspired by somewhere else. We work, we tweak it, we modify it. But then it's so important to go back to the community level and to say, and so we're going back in a month to present our various plans. And we're sitting down with the communities and saying, well, what do you think about this? Because we're foreigners, we don't know. We think this might work. We've worked very hard on this, but it's really up to you. And there's no point designing something that nobody will implement at the end of the day.
Right.
And so this is where we really come in and collect the feedback and retweak our ideas and make sure it's well cooked. Then once we're happy, when everybody's happy, then we can go back to the banks and the policymakers and the ministers and the World Bank, excuse me, to make sure that the policy is well formulated. But yeah, I mean, I'd say there's a community level up thing, but there's also inspiration for what has worked around the world.
Right. And what can be translational. And so there is a balance between the uniqueness of different communities and also models and ideas that can translate from one environment to the other. Because, like you mentioned, in terms of density, Mongolia and Texas, it kind of looks like Texas, but Texas is has very serious issues with dirty energy and the need to rethink housing and zoning and a number of different things if the state is to actually, continue to be a viable place to live over the coming decades, right? So it definitely makes sense for things that can reverberate from one location to the next to have a place of comparison. I want to talk a little bit more about difficult context because in your origin story, you talked about Haiti. And in my work, that is one of the touch points that I look to for inspiration and to be motivated for self correction in how I approach work and how I think about engaging with communities and understanding, the reasons why some places are the way we describe them is difficult in some way, shape, or form. What would be your perspective on how we use whatever comes next in some of these countries after they've gone through periods of conflict or after a post-disaster context about how you begin to generate ideas and move forward, particularly around housing, because that's one of the first things that you want to do when you want to stabilize communities is rehouse people and bring those basic needs back into contour. So I'm just curious, when you're thinking about evolving from difficult contexts and using opportunities to make them green spaces, what are some of the things you think through? What are some of your initial approaches to that?
That's a great question. So I'll give you an example. I'm working in Timor Leste, and it's a country next to Indonesia that was formed about 2 decades ago after a long war with Indonesia, and
Yeah.
it has quite a traumatic past to it, but it had this opportunity to kind of start fresh, right? And it's a new country. It has very little um, infrastructure that it's built on. And a lot of these countries that I go to, whether it's Haiti or Senegal or and you name it, it's so many countries have a legacy of colonial infrastructure and post-colonial infrastructure and bureaucracies. And you try to make changes, and it's very difficult because there's just the laws don't or enable easy change, right? And there's a lot of hurdles. Um, but in Timor Leste, we had the opportunity to kind of start from scratch. And to give you an example, they didn't even have a land title registry when I started working there, which was 2 years ago. So we were
Wow.
going to do a big housing project, but then we figured out, oh, they don't have a land title registry. Okay, so first things first, let's build a land title registry because that's kind of the first thing you need. Um, and and then they have the opportunity to leapfrog all the mess of the past few hundred years.
Years.
You go to the land title registry in Haiti and it's a mess. I mean, it's piles of paper, they're disintegrating, it's not organized. And that's why urban development is so difficult also in Haiti because it's just really difficult to know who owns which piece of land. And now you have the opportunity to make everything digital. You have the opportunity to put everything on the blockchain and make sure that you can track all land transactions over time. And so, my hope for Haiti, once it comes out of the current crisis it's in, is that it can kind of start fresh and really with a clean slate and say, okay, let's put the past to the past and just maybe recreate some of this infrastructure, take the best from the world and put behind them the past because it just was incredibly difficult working within that framework over the past 20 years. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's both a beautiful and a very practical thought at the same time. I would just say, in terms of laws not functioning, being a native Louisianian who also worked in Haiti, we're the only two places on the planet that still use parts of the Code Napoleon as active law.
I did not know about Louisiana, but okay, yeah.
Yes. Um, in terms of property rights and part of
Yeah.
our criminal code. So allow that to be appropriately terrifying that we're using concepts from 18th century colonial
Mm.
ideas and trying
Mhm.
to put them in context. And so, having been through that, I greatly empathize. But, for our listeners, just understanding just how important the law and the policy are in places, because people act like, well, why can't you just take everything down and start again? It's sort of like, well,
Yeah,
you have to know who it belongs to,
that's right.
where
Yeah.
things should be. Um,
Yeah, and I think that was the biggest hurdle after the earthquake. Billions of dollars poured into the country, but very little was rebuilt in terms of housing. And it was because every time a piece of land was found, and it was almost impossible to be completely sure about land ownership. And I'll give you an example. My company wanted to rebuild houses for its employees. So we bought a piece of land and we built about 25 houses on it. And then, within a year of finishing them, they were claimed by another individual. And this is a common story that so many people experience. And so, then the reconstruction of the city didn't take place at a large scale pace. It had to take place at an individual, each person doing their own thing, since huge swaths of land could not be used to do anything. And that's a lot more inefficient, of course.
right. I was going to say the story of a piece of land is purchased, it's developed, the titling isn't exact, and then you find that the person has been evicted by someone else who thinks they have stronger title, or someone from the diaspora. Um, and perhaps it was a landlord tenant situation. Like, the list goes on and on about unstable land tenure in these places. And how do we even begin to think about urban planning or even rural planning for housing when you can't get that piece of it clarified? And so I hope the audience takes a little bit from that when you're looking at these things from an outsider's point of view. Um,
That's right. But Rwanda gave us an incredible example of how it can be done. Right. So after the genocide, they said, okay, enough is enough. We need to start from fresh. And they gave every single person, I think in the capital, I'm not sure about the country, but in the capital, an address. So even if you live in the slum, you now have an address. You now have some, because many people in the world don't have an address. Um, so they now have an address, and they have land ownership, even if it's just their little hut. And so they went through a huge process, and it was time consuming. It took a lot of resources, but they gave each habitant land ownership, including a lot of women, of their homes. And now, because people own their homes, even if it's just a shack, they will invest in it. They will take out a loan and they will invest in it because they know they will not be kicked out, right? And so they will make it stronger. They will make it more resilient to climate change. They will make it greener. They will take a lot more ownership of their home and make it into something better. But when you live in uncertainty, when you're not sure who your home belongs to, if the government will step in and take it tomorrow, if you're going to be evicted, you're not going to take out a loan and put in money in making it a better place. And you're not going to invest in your neighborhood either. Why make your neighborhood
right.
better when it's just a temporary thing?
Yeah. That that resonates in a number of different ways. I was going to ask you, differences in resources and potential for political engagement vary across countries, but we're facing some of these same issues in the United States. Are there success stories that you've seen coming from communities that you've worked in other countries that you think could or should be translational to some of the work we ought to be doing here?
So I was actually thinking about that the other day, because the truth is, I'm working on a housing program in Indonesia to build 1 million green homes a year, right? I'm working in the Philippines on something similar. Big numbers. But then when it comes to my community in the US, and I advocate for 24 affordable housing units in my neighborhood, I'm
Yeah.
terrified. The people here are very scary.
Yes, yes, they are.
They're very scary. And And it's very funny because I was very intimidated. And whereas when I travel around the world and work on these problems, I people welcome me most often, and they want to see housing built in their communities, and they want to see improvements, and this idea of NIMBYism. I mean, I'm sure it exists, but I just haven't encountered it that much. And then just working on little small scale improvements here and there, adding a bike lane is such a headache in the US. It's such a political, it becomes political, you know.
In very weird ways at times. Yeah.
It is, yeah. So, and adding affordable housing is political. And I live in a beautiful neighborhood outside of Boston, and a lot of it is considered historical preservation, which
Hmm.
I more or less understand. But I'm sorry, but the TJ Maxx parking lot is not a historical parking lot.
No.
It's at the end of my street. I avoid it because I think it's really ugly. It's just an above ground parking lot, and I'm in one of the most expensive cities in the US. And yet, when you advocate to build more units, there's you can sense a reactionary fear, right? That many people, and I think it's this fear that people are going to lose value in their homes. I hope it's that fear and not other fears. Um, but and that's proven again and again and again not to be true, right? Adding more housing units anyway in the short term doesn't decrease the value of your property. It doesn't decrease the value of your rent. It can only do good in the long term too. So yes, I think we can and we should inspire ourselves from international examples, and really we have so much more to do at home, and I need to overcome this fear and use the
Um,
strength from abroad to kind of work within my own community.
fear of our neighbors. It is challenging because bike lanes do become political. I am fearful that, as we're speaking, to the audience at the time that we're recording this, this is a couple of days after the major bridge collapse in the city of Baltimore. And the social media and even some of the traditional media messaging around blaming the bridge collapse on a variety of people and making it political has been shocking. And it doesn't even allow for a discussion of, well, once we've acknowledged the people who lost their lives and take care of their families, let's acknowledge that that bridge was over the Chesapeake Bay, one of the most important ecosystems on the East Coast, in a city that struggles with all kinds of environmental issues. It doesn't leave opportunity to have the conversation about, well, you know what, when we build that back, maybe there's some other things we could be thinking about for the river, for the neighborhoods around it, all of those things. Like, you can't even enter that conversation when all of these weird political battles are going on about a bridge at
Yeah,
the
that's
end of
right.
the
Yeah, the politics are very scary, and I'd like to stay away from them as much as possible. But the example that is inspiring to me is my home city of Paris, which went through an incredible transformation over the past decade, where they shut down major highways, right,
Yep.
and turn them into recreational spaces where kids can bike, can have fun. There's more cafes outdoors, there's pubs, and they're bringing nature back into the city too. The street I went to school on is now closed to cars and has trees and parks, and it's just lovely. And of course, at first there was a huge backlash, and there still is a bit of a backlash. People were just, how am I going to drive through the city? People think about their individual needs, and their, it becomes political. It becomes, conspiracy theories come out about, I'm sure you've seen some of them about the 15-minute city, about control, and they're quite funny sometimes. But I think at the end of the day, once people experience it, everybody is better off.
Yeah.
Everybody feels better off when they feel safe, when they feel contact with nature, when you have access to for example, in Boston, we have a beautiful river, the Charles River, and it has a highway on both sides of it.
Yeah.
I think everybody would be better off if we had at least one side without a highway and with some nice beaches and recreational areas. And that doesn't have to be political at all. It's just about the well-being of mankind and nature. So hopefully we can try just kind of having maybe these like pilot projects and have people come and experience them. Like there's a new one in Boston I really love, and they opened a pub by the river. And I think everybody likes a
Oh,
good pub, by the river.
what
It's great.
fun. Yeah.
Yes. And doing more of that. Everybody likes it when you close down the streets and you have cafes and everybody likes a good night out, and that it doesn't have to be political. So maybe it won't be a sweeping change overnight, but showing people slowly but surely how much fun it can be to have a carbon a carbon maybe not free yet, but a carbon reduction reduced city anyway. Having bringing nature back into the city, walking places, such a pleasure. Um, and yes, removing it completely from politics if possible.
Absolutely. I think that's a great reason for anyone who's listening who can should go and visit Paris.
Yes.
Um, that's also one of my favorite places. Um,
I
thank
heard a funny
you.
thing the other day. Sorry, it's
No, no,
that
no, go ahead.
that Americans spend thousands and thousands of dollars to honeymoon or to go on vacation in Europe. But then they oppose any laws that would make their cities more European, right? It
Yeah,
makes
it's a strange thing. And then also, whenever you see lists of America's favorite small towns or America's favorite main street, they're actually the 15-minute cities of which people speak. I live in one of them in Alexandria, Virginia. And so we have parks along the Potomac River, and sections of the city are pedestrian promenades with cafes where car lanes used to be. Now there's tables where people can sit and eat, and you can walk to healthcare, grocery store, school all within 15 minutes. And it is one America's favorite main street. I can't even remember how many times, but when someone uses the language, 15-minute cities, the internet goes up in flames. I was like, but you actually love it.
yeah.
You actually vote for it without question. Um,
And you spend
but
money to go to places like that. Yeah, that's an interesting point. So maybe it is a question of language. Maybe maybe we need to change our language to depoliticize it, and to keep it neutral. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the solution is. But if the 15-minute city has become something political, let's use a different thing. I don't know.
I don't know either. Maybe what I'll do is interview an anthropologist or an ethnologist to help us kind of unpack why this language triggers some people, or it triggers images of something that's more harmful in some
Mhm,
people's minds than those of us who've experienced it. Or maybe it's what you're saying is once people can experience it and actually know what it is, then they
mhm.
won't be so frightened by it. Um,
We hope
one
so.
last, let's hope, last question that I ask everyone who's participated in this season is, it's wonderful to surface the stories of women who are doing the work, but also I want to encourage other women to enter these spaces and join and contribute and seek out careers and opportunities. And I love to hear what you would tell a person who's coming behind you that wants to get into this work of making sure that people are housed and that women's voices and communities' voices are surfaced. What would you say to them about how to get into this space, why to get into this space?
I think the why is clear. The why is we need you. The cities need you. Our future generations need you. I think women think further into the future than men. And we plan our cities to reflect the future we want for our children, our grandchildren, etc. Right? The how is much harder. And having worked on construction sites in Haiti after an earthquake when I was 24 years old. Yeah, it takes some grit, some resilience.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard, but it's also just so rewarding, right? It's really rewarding in a different way. And you, yes, the world is dangerous, but it's also incredibly safe too. I've traveled around the world. I've worked in many places as a woman, and I've encountered a lot of strange things, but also a lot of really kind, nice people who are willing to help you. And so I guess my message is there's a lot of fear out there, right? There's a lot of like all the stuff that can happen to you working as a woman in construction or in developing countries or in male oriented industries. But that's just a small piece of the puzzle, right? And there's a lot more of us than there were before, and I think the world is changing every day, and what you get out of it can be so motivating. And so that feeling of handing over the keys of the first house I built to a family. Oh my God, and I can't build an IKEA table, but I managed to do this big construction site. And that feeling is just so rewarding in so many ways. And being able to shape that future, um, it's very gratifying in a way that many industries I think are not, because it's so tangible. We're basically building the cities around us and we can shape them in the ways that we think are best.
I love that. Thank you so much for that answer, for your time. And for those who would like to follow your work, where should they go?
I guess follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm always posting about the work I do and other people's work that I find very interesting. So yeah,
All
follow
right,
me on Twitter.
LinkedIn or Twitter. And I
Yeah,
love that you still call it Twitter. Like none of us are adopting to that X business. It's sort of like
yeah, I feel like very few people have, but yes.
it's awkward.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining
Thank
us,
you. Thank you
Olivia.
for having me.
And to my listeners, keep following this season. We have spoken to Black women farmers, blockchain advocates. We've talked to Gen Z environmental activists, and we're not even close to being done to the talking through all of the remarkable women who are out in this world making it inch a little bit closer to being better every single day. You can follow the podcast and all of our work at Undivide Project on all channels, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
All right. And we're off. Got
Are you still
it.
recording or
No, we're done.
you're done? Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
got my necklace caught in my mic, so I was being
Yeah, and I'm
super still.
quite
Those
sick. I was trying not to cough too much.
no, I realized that, and thank you even more. I didn't realize you were feeling poorly, so thanks for
Oh no, I have small children, so I'm always sick. Yeah.
that's par for the course. I thought I was done with that phase of my life, but I've been teaching undergrads this semester, and it is
Oh,
just like teaching toddlers in
oh
terms of
no.
the endless amount of stuff that they bring into the classroom. And I was like, I thought I'd aged out of this part of my life, but y'all are bringing me back. I was like, 1 week it's the flu, like some stomach virus, a variety of colds. So, yeah, I get it. I know at the end of this, I'll be stronger for it,
It'll be,
though.
yes, hopefully, yeah. Great.
Look,
Well, thank you. I hope we can catch up another time, and I'd love to learn more about what you're doing and teaching and everything.
absolutely. And I do come up to Boston sometimes. I'm an alumni of that university that just can't seem to get itself straight in the media.
Which one is that? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, someone brought that up. I was like, I don't know what's happening. I was like, I haven't been to the yard in like since before the pandemic. I said, but no one asked me about such things because I would have just been like, oh, you know what you do? You cite your work. There's a real simple way out of
That's true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
this.
Boston is going through. I never thought I would end up here. Um, but
It's a beautiful city, but like you said, it's a tough city. Um,
yeah,
there's
and I, I I live in Brookline. At 92% voted for Biden, and yet getting so it's very liberal. We have Black Lives Matter all over our town hall, and then getting
mhm.
any affordable housing built. is just like, and I think, I mean, there's a lot of discrimination and there's, God, I don't even know where to start. And I'm scared. I don't want, I find it very scary to enter into any type of city changing endeavors here, I would say.
Yeah, that was, it pains me to hear that it hasn't changed, but as a student, that was
Mm.
my experience. It's like
Oh, really?
Cambridge, we're the peoples and all these things,
But when it,
but things like, security in certain neighborhoods or affordable
mm,
housing, it's very strange. But then I live in Virginia, which is supposedly a red state. And about 5 years ago in my community, we tore down public housing
mm,
and had both a mandate for a certain percentage of new housing developments to be reserved for low and middle income. But then we also just built two humongous transitional shelters right off America's favorite main street in the middle of a neighborhood with more expensive housing. And you know what happened? Nothing.
yeah,
Nobody said a word. That's nothing.
good, good. That's
And
great.
I was like, this is great.
Yeah, amazing.
And what was built is beautiful and it integrates right in with the cute little cafes and the Starbucks because
Mm,
people who are lower and moderate income want to enjoy being outside next to a park. So we didn't
yeah,
force people out of the community. Should happen absolutely nothing. And I was like, what an interesting thing. All these people who voted conservative in a
mm-hmm,
state like Virginia that will riot over a school board decision had absolutely nothing to say about affordable or transitional housing. And the whole experiment is going great. And of course, the people who are in the shelters and everything or in the transitional housing are thriving. And I said,
mm-hmm.
so
That's
yeah,
great because
people
it's
are
very well
weird.
located. It's just, yeah, yeah.
It's
Yeah,
very
it's
weird.
very, the politics are just like a distraction, right? It has nothing.
There's no real policy or substance to it. There's a lot
Mm.
of bizarre performance art going on in what should be American.
Yeah, yeah,
Because
interesting.
even like I said with the bridge thing or Joe Lieberman passing away, like there was a point when, a public servant of that caliber passes away, like we collectively agree that we will, whether we agree with the person or not, we would respect the fact that someone just passed away
Hmm.
and respect their service to our country. The
Hmm.
amount of nonsense about him being a DEI champion and that is flying around on Twitter, and I'm like, the man is dead.
Yeah,
he
yeah.
just
Twitter might
he
not be
he
the
died.
optimal.
He died. Okay. Whatever you thought he was, what are you doing right now?
Mm-hmm.
Even people who are holding public office. So I don't know. I think the United States is in a place where we're either going to grow up as a country and grow
Hmm.
out of this stuff, or we're going to have to go through a really serious and painful period of decline that I think a lot of people aren't prepared to deal with.
Yeah. Well, every
I hope,
empire must decline at some point. Mm. But yeah,
yeah, it's, and how is what we have to choose.
that's
Like
right. Yeah.
there's an opportunity to let go. We could,
I'm half French and half American, and in France, they still have a bit of this kind of institutional memory of when they were a great empire that
hmm
ruled the world. And now they're no longer, right? But they used to own half of Africa, um, and you can feel it. There's still a bit of this pride, but they've also kind of accepted their fate with dignity. And cultures, yeah, I guess the U.S. has to accept too that other countries are moving forward. I don't know. I feel I have a lot of strong opinions about certain things, but yeah,
yeah, I do too.
it's
I
very scary living here, especially coming November. I'm like,
yeah, I typically do not stay here. Honestly, since Obama, I have just voted absentee and gone somewhere else. That's one of
Mm,
the luxuries of being a professor. We're
mm,
like headed towards winter break anyway. And my husband's work slows down, other than a few like Christmas performances or things like that. His
mm.
work slows down. So, the number of death threats and anti Black rhetoric, and even people being lynched ahead of the Obama election,
Really? Oh
is
my
what
God.
started us to say, like,
Yeah.
wow, it's not safe here
Mm-hmm.
right after an election. I hate to have to say that about the United States, but it's not safe here, particularly in
Mm-hmm.
southern states. Um, and so that election, we went to France. We were actually in Paris. I was just like at Chef Ducasse's school making sauce. I was just working on my
Ooh,
saucier skills.
yeah.
I'm just going to skip this. And cooking relaxes me. So I'm just going to like chill and cook.
Yeah.
And you go and
Yeah.
listen to different, visit artists and musicians in the city. And like, we're just going to like spend all the
Mm-hmm.
way through Christmas in France. And for the Trump election, we went to Panama and
Mm-hmm.
just and so I
Yeah.
said, well, this year, where are we gonna go? I said, because the first election we left the country for, we thought we had some security issues, but it's certainly kind of scary now. So yeah, we were talking about maybe having like a real white Christmas in Montreal, or
Mm-hmm.
going and hanging out with friends in Mexico. But yeah, we don't stay here.
Yeah.
We,
That's a
after
that's a good
election
idea.
day through Christmas,
Yeah.
like, yeah, we don't stay here because, yeah, these
Yeah.
people are
I
nuts.
was in Haiti when Trump was elected. Um, and it made me extra sad because Haitians were very pro-Trump, which I had not foreseen.
Oh, yeah, the
Um,
whole like strongman attraction.
yeah, I don't know what it is, but it's also just a typical aversion to paying taxes, and I find that that's kind of the most common denominator. And yeah, but
Which
yeah,
is
no,
a whole other thing because I'm like, we don't really pay that much in taxes as Americans. Like, we really don't.
right, yeah, I know, yeah, as a French person, but in these countries like Haiti, they don't pay any taxes, right? And that's why they have also a failed state, and the government has no budget. So when they come to the U.S. and they have to pay, whatever 30% taxes, it seems like a lot. Um, but yeah, no, I don't know. It was yeah. I'm sure this is for another podcast, I guess.
There's a whole other podcast of like, why? Just why what is this country? Where are we going here? Um,
Yeah,
but I'm sure there's some folks who can do it. But look, it's great talking to you. I don't want to keep you. I've got a 2:30 that I need
okay. Just
to.
so you know, it does say it's still recording, but I guess you'll delete that last.
Oh, the little light is still on. I think it's
Yeah, the light is still
rendering.
on. Yeah, I just
Oh
wanted
yeah,
to.
it's rendering and uploading. But I
No,
will double check it and make sure because
okay,
it
yeah,
ends when I say goodbye to everyone. So we'll just edit it
okay, okay.
off if it is.
With
But I
your
think it's
little
just.
rant. Well, it was so great chatting with you. Thank you so much for inviting me, and let's stay in touch.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If I come that way, I'll let you know, but definitely I'll do a better job of engaging with your work as well.
Yeah, it's great.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Take good care. Bye bye.